Hello, subscribers! I've been putting off doing any response videos for a while, so I can work on other things, and because I'm lazy. But videos just keep popping up in my feed, and just yesterday, 3 of them popped up that I want to look at. And I'm going to try to do this as close to a reaction video as I can to limit the editing. But the first video is right here from Prophet of Zod. And apparently he's accusing Mike Winger of gaslighting atheists. And says Mike Winger is blaming atheists for God's hiddenness. Now, I am a big Mike Winger watcher, though that whatever video he is referring to does not spring to mind. But I am confident that he is not gaslighting atheists. For anyone who doesn't know, because gaslighting is a term that's been used a lot lately. It's become very popular. So there are 2 possible ways Prophet of Zod could be using this. 1, to cause a person to doubt their judgment, memory, or sanity through the use of psychological manipulation, which I do not see Mike Winger doing psychological manipulation. Or 2, to deceive a person or group of people through repetition of a constructed false narrative. I certainly don't see Mike Winger doing that either. So let's go ahead and watch this and see what Prophet of Zod's arguments even are.
There's a few ways to poke holes in this argument, okay? Logically speaking, I think. One is to challenge how much sincerity is really going on in this person, right? Like, this shows there's something going on here other than just a sincere seeking.
There are 5 tactics in gaslighting. Any one of these on their own is simply a lie. It's the combination, the elaborate and deliberate implementation that makes it gaslighting. Reject. Deny or reject the accuser's version of events.
I would question the accuracy of the...
And that would be a necessity of gaslighting, but what am I trying to say here? Like, if you're gonna disagree with someone, you have to disagree with them. It seems pretty necessary and unavoidable. Like, so far, I could just as easily accuse Prophet of Zod of gaslighting.
Those claims, they would say I'm personally attacking them, at least they potentially would, and I'd be okay with that. I'd be like, well, you brought it up.
Diminish. Marginalize or reduce the accuser's claim. You're admitting that it happened, but not to the degree that they think it did.
I'm not saying every atheist...
Again, what if it didn't happen to the degree they say it did? Like, if you're talking to if you're talking to a flat earther in Idaho or whatever state is flat, and you agree this state is flat, but not to the degree that the whole earth is flat. Are you gaslighting the flat earther now?
This is like this. I'm merely giving one example of one way this can play out.
Alternative. Offer an alternative example that's much bigger or much worse than what they're claiming, thus further diminishing their claim.
I'm not saying there are no...
Hold on a second. You specifically said an alternative that's much bigger or much worse than the other person's claim. I don't even know what Mike Ringer's talking about right now. I don't know what question he's answering. So we certainly don't know if what he's about to say is bigger or worse than the other possibility. It could be the person's claim that he's responding to is bigger or worse. I really hope Prophet of Zod does some more explaining on this.
Knowingly being deceitful about how sincere they are in their searching of God.
Assure. Reassure the accuser that your version of events is the correct one by using a statement they should already accept.
It is also...
I'm beginning to doubt the efficacy of whoever that other guy is, and whether he knows what gaslighting really is. Because if you're gonna have a debate with someone, you gotta have common ground. That's just common sense. You can't refuse to have common ground because it might be gaslighting. That's ridiculous.
a very emotionally heavy and influential argument. Often the more philosophical arguments aren't emotionally very impactful, I think.
Blame. Accuse the accuser of bias or being the cause of the event.
Okay, stop right there. Mike Winger definitely didn't do that one. Although it can be hard to tell because it keeps interrupting. But no, Mike Winger definitely didn't do that. He didn't blame anybody. All he said in that clip was that philosophical arguments are not emotional. Let's keep going.
And for that I go, okay, well, let's just acknowledge what's going on here. You're turning the existence of God into either I agree with you that you have good reason to think God doesn't exist, or you see me as personally attacking you because you've based your argument upon your own integrity and your own sincerity and the thoroughness and purity of your own search for God.
Are those Prophet of Zod videos? That looks more like a non-stamp collector. Anyway.
Hey everybody. So if you were
I don't watch a whole lot of Prophet of Zod, so I wouldn't know.
to ask me the main reason I don't believe in God, it's that I see no sign of him anywhere. Seems pretty simple, right? Even worse, Christians believe God is timeless, all-powerful, and all-knowing, which means their concept of God either doesn't exist or is purposefully hiding from us. And there's really not much of a way around that problem, which is why I found it interesting that Mike Winger decided to tackle it head-on. So I guess let's see what his approach is. Will it be free will, which is nonsense?
Good night, everybody.
Or will he blame
He calls free will nonsense. So he's just a slave to the static, and he's happy to be a slave to the static. Anyone calling free will nonsense is literally speaking nonsense. But let's be cheerful. Maybe he's saying using free will as an answer to divine hiddenness is nonsense. And in some measure that is nonsense, because people use free will as an argument for the problem of evil, not divine hiddenness. So why would you even think Mike Ringer would bring that up?
atheists, which is nonsense but also insulting? I guess we'll find out. Before we continue, I want
Well, you already know because you have it in your title.
The hiddenness and silence of God is causing me doubts. Is there any advice or help you can offer, such as that God is silent now because revelation has been completed with the New Testament? Thanks.
So it sounds like Mike's answering a question from a viewer who's experiencing doubts. And notice what a conclusion-seeking question it is. He's not looking to dig deeper into the silence of God, why it makes him doubt, or any of its other implications. He just wants it explained away. He even tries to help Mike along with a suggested answer to his own question, but the answer is so poor it just kind of betrays his own desperation. I mean, the existence of the New Testament isn't a good reason for God to be silent any more than me leaving a note on the fridge is a good reason for me to abandon my kids.
So, Mike...
Oh yeah, the guy who asked the question is also named Mike. That's fun.
Hang on. I feel like Prophet of Zod was making a lot of assumptions there that, I'm not sure who he was talking about. Was he complaining about the questioner? Because Mike hasn't really said anything yet. So for me, all that just went in one ear and out the other, because I don't even know who he was responding to there.
Fine.
The hiddenness of God is one of the... It's simultaneously a philosophical argument against God's existence.
Okay, sorry, but I just have to point this out. I found it incredibly funny that Mike lost track of what he was saying and they tried to cover it with a jump cut. Now, of course...
Oh, stop it. Jump cuts are... I do jump cuts all the time. Probably for very different reasons. I am constantly having to pause and think about what I'm going to say next. Jump cuts are a normal part of YouTubing. You probably do them yourself, and that's why you hide your face, so nobody notices.
Both these things are totally understandable for a live recording, but what's curious to me is why they left in the part where he trailed off.
The hiddenness of God is one of the... It's simultaneously a philosophical argument.
Seriously, this would have been super easy to fix.
What?
I mean, it took me like 10
That sounded like a perfectly normal way of speaking. I wouldn't even realize that was a jump cut.
seconds. Just watch.
The hiddenness of God is simultaneously a philosophical argument.
Anyway, now that I at least have had a good laugh,
So you're just being OCD, aren't you?
I guess we should move along to Mike making very serious points about the hiddenness of God.
A philosophical argument against God's existence. or at least against God's love. And on the other hand, it is also a very emotionally heavy and influential argument. Often the more philosophical arguments aren't emotionally very impactful, I think. A lot of times, like I look at, say, the Kalam cosmological argument, I go, this is a really good argument for God's existence, but I don't know how much it strikes people's emotions. I look at the moral argument and I go, that one hits people's emotions and it's intellectually strong as well. So that's interesting. This kind of hits both.
I'm not really sure what the point of all that was. Sure, any philosophical topic can feel more or less emotionally.
In hindsight, could see some use in mentioning how the emotional impact of the topic affects the way it's discussed. However, I still think my observation of how Mike goes on it is relevant, especially considering where he goes later in the video. We'll see.
Impactful depending on how it touches a person's life. But why bring this?
I just realized my screen is cut off. Hang on. Oops, I'm doing that live. There we go.
This up in such sweeping terms. If you suspect someone's emotions clouded their reasoning, you should still focus on the reasoning itself and let it stand or fall on its own merits. This kind of vague speculation that divine hiddenness is an emotional topic isn't helpful and seems designed to cloud the issue before getting into it. In fact, it sounds a little bit like a general insinuation that atheists are just being emotional when they bring it up. Oh, and also, the moral argument for God isn't strong. It's silly.
No, it's quite strong, but that's not what this video is about.
So's the Kalam. I'm sure you're all glad I cleared that up.
And the hiddenness argument goes something like this. And I'm just going to, something like this. I don't have a syllogism before me to present to you, but it goes something like this. Hey, if God really loves people and he wants them to know him and he wants them to follow him, then he would make efforts to reveal himself to those people, right? So if you had a sincere non-believer, a non-believer who was sincerely looking and searching for God but not finding God, that would perhaps prove that God doesn't really love them and want them saved.
Or that he doesn't exist. That seems more like what atheists would infer from the hiddenness of God. Because they don't believe in him. Whenever they talk about what an all-powerful, all-loving God would do, they're speaking in hypotheticals about whether the Christian concept of God makes sense. That's pretty straightforward. But Mike talks about it like they're hashing out their personal feelings about God, which is weird and make...
It's not weird because he's not talking to atheists, I assume. I am assuming this is not one of his 20 questions specifically for atheists, because he does do those sometimes. But most of the time, he's just talking to other Christians. And therefore, God's existence is already a given. It's not really up for debate.
Makes it sound like he either can't comprehend actual belief, or is leaning into the they're just emotional suggestion he just finished making to insinuate we're just mad at God or something.
Because look, they're
neither.
Sincere, and they're trying, but they're not finding. So there must be some fault in God because their motives, intentions, and methods are right.
Mike did something a little tricky here, but before pointing it out, I want to bring up a vital aspect of this whole thing, which is that by claiming God is an all-knowing, all-powerful being who wants us to know he exists, it offers a way to falsify its core assertion. And this is something that doesn't usually work out well for paranormal belief. For example, if you propose aliens are visiting Earth, you'd be making a claim that appears unfounded. But fortunately, it also has the benefit of being unfalsifiable because you can always just say the aliens are hiding or stealthy or whatever. But as soon as you say the aliens are, for example, broadcasting an unmistakable message on all radio frequencies, you've proposed a clear way to check your claim. And if people turn on their radios and don't hear a broadcast, then the method you gave for checking your claim failed. At that point, they'd be very justified in concluding not only that, 1, they have no reason to take your overarching claim about aliens seriously, but also that, 2, the more specific phenomenon you proposed appears demonstrably false. By pointing this out, they wouldn't be suggesting aliens had failed. They'd be suggesting that your proposition failed. You probably see where I'm going with this. If you propose in general terms that a deity exists, you're similarly making an unfounded but unfalsifiable claim. But as soon as you say that deity...
Okay, it's not unfounded or unfalsifiable. We have the Kalam, so it's certainly founded. And if by a deity you mean specific deity, we have the Bible. So it is founded. and it's not unfalsifiable. Otherwise, why would you even have a channel? I assume you try to falsify it quite often.
Deity wants everybody to know he exists and has the ability to communicate his existence. You've proposed a way to check your claim. So when people notice this deity isn't clearly communicating its existence to them, they're equally justified both in ignoring your overarching claims about God and in considering your specific claims about him being all-powerful and wanting you to know him to be disproven. When they say,
And how has this one been proven false? Actually, I would say this is incomplete. God has the ability, obviously, but it's not that he has the desire to communicate his existence. It's that he has the desire to communicate his existence in a specific way. I am sure he will immediately, if he responded to this, he would immediately say, I'm making an unfalsifiable claim, but God will reveal himself in the way he wants to be revealed. I really want to do my own video on divine hiddenness, but that is a long way off. Divine hiddenness is... The problem of evil is the most overrated argument. Divine hiddenness is the most underrated. And it sort of feeds itself because God is hidden, so we want to ask him why he's hidden, but he's hidden, so he won't specifically tell us why he's hidden. And that just fuels paranoia. But, conversely, it also builds a strong foundation for faith. It's one thing to trust a person when they tell you face-to-face about something, but it's a little harder to trust them if they told you in a letter. And the more hidden they are, the harder it can be to trust them, or trust what they say. But Adam and Eve failed to trust God, and he was not hidden to them at all. Well, except his omnipresence. His omnipresence was hidden from them. But he was as available as any person, and they still failed to trust him. If you can trust God while he's hidden, you will have done a better job than Adam and Eve, who did not trust him even when they could see him. Alright, let's keep going.
Say this, they're not suggesting God failed. They're suggesting your proposition failed. This reveals a problem with how Mike frames the divine hiddenness argument. He says that it suggests the non-believer's motives, intentions, and methods must be right, and thus that any disconnect must be some fault in God. In other words, he's depicting them as saying God failed, when what they're really saying is that the argument failed. I doubt it needs to be said that this is grossly mischaracterizing the
Hold on. No. The argument is, if God existed, he would speak to me. If. This goes back to the common... What was it called again? Ground. This goes back to the common ground. If an atheist says, if God exists, he would speak to me, I can say, if God exists, he doesn't want to speak with you. That is not a reframing of the issue. That is not a reframing of the question or the problem. God's existence is not up for debate within the hypothetical. The unfortunate thing about doing these live reaction videos is I very quickly lose my place and want to go back and see what he said again, but I don't want to do that. Let's keep going.
Argument and the people who make it. And it does so specifically in a way that looks bad to a Christian audience. But then who'd think Mike would ever do such a thing?
This is the divine hiddenness thing. God's hiding from this person, this hypothetical person. There's a few ways to poke holes in this argument. Okay, logically speaking, I think.
So how much of this do you think is going to be telling us atheists aren't sincere? Oh, who could ever know? I guess let's see.
One is to challenge how much sincerity is really going on in this person.
And here we go already.
That while they believe they're sincere, I'm not saying they're knowingly being deceitful about how sincere they are in their searching of God.
Oh, much better. I guess.
There can be lots of things going on in the heart of a human where they feel they are sincerely looking. I've seen atheists who bring a divine hiddenness argument, and the way they do it, it's as though the argument was an afterthought to their atheism.
I agree with Mike that there can be a lot of things going on in the heart of a human. Weird as that phrasing is. For example, when a religious fundamentalist hears a non-believer share their experience, something in their heart might be so invested in maintaining their personal concept of God that they construe what the person says as an afterthought to their atheism so they can dismiss it.
And they say to me how sincere they are. I'm not saying every...
Seems like Prophet of Zod has never tried to debate online atheists. A lot the times their arguments are afterthoughts to their atheism. That's just how it goes.
Every atheist is like this. I'm merely giving one example of one way this can play out. They say like, hey, I'm going to spend a little time like really praying, really going to church even, really maybe singing worship songs as a way of later being able to say, hey, I sought the Lord, I really tried, and that confirms my atheism one more time. Perhaps the agenda here was a way of proving themselves right about God all along.
Okay, seriously. Mike's just getting obnoxious in his effort not to understand where atheists are coming from. Like, has any atheist ever gone through the motions of praying and going to church just so they could come back to Christians and say, see, I tried it and it didn't work?
Possibly. How can you say there isn't? Most likely they wouldn't consciously do this, but can you really not see how they could subconsciously do it? It's not that difficult. I can't give any specific examples, but I'm pretty sure I've done something similar. Something on a completely different topic or subject, but I have had the self-awareness before to, well, let's use my second girlfriend I've had. I thought about praying to see if I should go out with her, but I knew myself enough to know that even if I had gotten an answer, I still would have gone out with her. So I decided not to pray about it. Huge mistake. Going out with her was a huge mistake, and I had every reason to know it. I was self-aware enough to know where my heart really lied. It's not unthinkable to think that there's some atheists out there who do not have that self-awareness.
I guess let me know in the comments if you did anything like that, but it sounds like a dubious way
I just did. Okay.
to broadly characterize atheists. Much more likely, you went through most of this when you were still a Christian, and far from trying to disprove God, you were seeking to validate your belief, often trying to hear from God and agonizing over your inability to do so. If he wanted to, Mike could choose to hear and engage with stories of people going through these experiences, in doing so developing some sense of what they went through and what it means about doubt and deconversion. The problem is that he's starting out with a conclusion about God that he must defend at all costs. And this conclusion depends on a massive generalization about every person on Earth. That being that if they actually try to find God, they will. So to actually hear and engage with former believers, he'd have to challenge this generalization, and thus his prepackaged conclusion about God, and apparently he's not ready to do that. So he instead just sits there and concocts his own counter-narrative about their experiences that makes what they say conform with what he already believes. Unfortunately, his narrative amounts to them being little sneaks who only pretended they tried God to make a point. This isn't just openly
Alright, stop. There's only so much of that I can go through. Mike Ringer is not done yet. He's only just started to answer the question. I believe he had 2 points, if I remember correctly, and he's only started on the 1 point that says they could be insincere, which is very possible, even if not likely, which I'm not saying it's not likely. I actually think it might be very likely, but don't start drawing conclusions as if Mike is done speaking yet.
disrespecting people he disagrees with. It's making a mockery of the long, difficult, sincere struggles many of them had with their faith before realizing they didn't believe. It's utterly shameful.
This is entirely possible. This is how human psychology seems to work. What I'm suggesting is divine hiddenness requires a certain kind of person that may not exist.
Oh, so a minute ago he wasn't saying every atheist is like this, but now sincere disbelievers might not even exist. I guess qualifiers are for when you want to sound reasonable, and absolute statements are for when you want to make your actual.
Did you miss the word may? It requires a certain kind of person which may not exist. He is not saying they absolutely don't exist, only that they may not exist.
Against this is quite a number of people who suggest, and they give their testimony, that they did seek the Lord and they did find him. They did cry out to God and he did answer. They did open the Word of God. They did start praying. They did start attending church or something like this, and they started seeking the Lord, and then their lives were radically transformed, and every one of those testimonies would seem to be an argument against this divine hiddenness thing.
So here Mike introduces a second prong in his attack on divine hiddenness. Along with blaming atheists for not hearing from God, he uses Christians as a counterexample. See, atheists? All these people heard from God, so if you'd actually tried, it would have worked for you too. But this is a pretty strange line of argumentation. We're already very familiar with Christian.
There's nothing strange about that. That's perfectly correlated. You might be able to say it's not airtight, but it's not strange.
Testimonials and find them highly questionable. So if they haven't gained traction with us so far, why would we suddenly find them compelling as part of Mike's attempt to dump on us for not noticing God? Let's remember, again, that isolated testimonials about experiencing a God who's absent from observed reality are no more compelling than isolated testimonials about seeing ghosts who are absent from observed reality.
Trinity Radio has a podcast called Supernatural Stories. You should probably check it out.
In fact, they're actually less compelling, because the ghost claim is about a direct sensory experience, whereas the God claim is about an abstract, easily misunderstood experience that happened inside someone's head. Of course, he also throws in a statement.
No, people have had tangible evidence of God's existence. It's not just some abstract feeling.
Statement that Christians' lives were radically transformed, but this claim is arguable, subject to confirmation bias, and so absurd as an argument for God it sometimes gets made fun of by other Christians.
Good for you. That's awesome. You tried it and it changed your life. Because you're the only person who's ever tried anything and it's changed their life, right?
The fact is, isolated anecdotes don't place a claim of a paranormal being on par with everybody else's general experience of not seeing that being. Especially if all you can offer as evidence is a claim that you heard things in your head and started behaving differently afterward.
The problem with the divine hiddenness argument, though, is not the logical aspect of it. Because I can easily say, hey, humans have all sorts of layers of desires and wants. We may be sincere in one level, but insincere in another. We might be in bondage to sin. Our blindness right now in seeking God might be due to past sins we've committed that have brought us to that blindness. So we might be actually reaping the blindness of our own decisions, and we're blaming God for that inability to see him. Like, I can say all those things.
Yeah, you could. But I'd hope for your sake to hear you say smarter things than that.
Stop it. Get some help.
Like, seriously, the
Yeah. Prophet of Zod is not doing a reaction video. One would hope he'd be able to trim it down. He's clearly making reactions for the sake of making reactions, not looking at Mike Reiner's video as a whole, as he would in a response video, which this seems like a response video, not a reaction video. Basically what I'm saying is Prophet of Zod really likes to hear himself talk, which, funnily enough, that is the form of gaslighting. Hang on, let's look at the definition again. To deceive a person or group of people through repetition of a constructed false narrative. If you repeat the lie loud enough and often enough, it will seem to be true. That is what Prophet of Zod is doing. He is finding, oh, there's the next video that I was going to look at. That's convenient. Anyway, what was I saying? Lost my train of thought there. Right. He is taking every opportunity to interrupt Mike and say his own thing, and I took too long and forgot what I was saying. Basically, Prophet of Zod is actually gaslighting. Funny, he started the video out accusing Mike Reiner of gaslighting, but he has done nothing throughout the rest of the video to actually show Mike Reiner gaslighting or explain it. It's like that whole gaslighting intro was just an afterthought. And he thought that, oh, this is something cool I could do. Also, while I was thinking, I noticed another video by Prophet of Zod I thought about looking at, but not today. I've got 3 other videos on my mind right now, and this is taking too long as it is.
The idea of resolving your differences with someone by convincing yourself they don't exist is dumb enough.
I have no idea what he was just talking about there. Too disconnected from it. I had just remembered that someone will probably accuse me of doing the same thing he's doing, of constantly talking. But again, I'm doing a reaction video, he's doing a response video, his should be more on point.
But this one about currently trying to find God but not being able to because of your past actions is just off the charts nonsensical. I mean, how does it even work? Does God get so mad at something you did that he punishes you by blocking your ability to know he exists? Is sin some magical force that builds up a level of blindness to his existence that you're eventually just stuck with?
It's not magic, it's psychology.
Or does persistently resisting God affect not just your attitude toward him, which would actually make sense, but your ability to perceive him, which wouldn't? It's abject nonsense.
But what
Considering the perception we're talking about is not a direct perception, we don't see the wind, we see the effect of the wind, then your attitude is going to affect your perception. If I don't like the wind, then when I see the trees rustling in the wind, I could just say the trees are dancing. Not that there's wind there. No, wind doesn't exist. You can't prove to me wind exists. Your attitude can affect your perception.
It's abject nonsense.
But what really makes this one hard, Mike, is that what I'm doing is I'm talking about, like, your buddy Joe. I mean, in your head, like, I'm talking about your friend Joe, who told you, I want to see God after I want to know. I want to see God after I want to know. And
if anyone wants to see gaslighting, just watch a Prophet of Zod video.
And use this not just as, hey, pray for me, I want to see God, but use this as an argument against God's existence. I mean, you can almost... Here's a way to test, maybe for an atheist. If you're sincerely seeking God and you really want to find him, why are you using your so far lack of finding him as a way of arguing for others to not believe in him? Right? Like, this shows there's something going on here other than just a sincere seeking.
Something going on here other than just a sincere seeking. Well, now that's just a nasty broad strokes accusation. And a weird one, too. Because what do you do when someone makes a supernatural claim that you don't find compelling? You just don't believe them and go on with your life, right? And I guess if people persist in bringing it to your attention, you might point out the lack of evidence when explaining your disbelief. It's the most incredibly normal reaction. So why does Mike say it means you're not sincerely seeking? Well, part of the problem is with his wording. Most people would understand sincere seeking to mean you're sincerely seeking truth in general. Something you can very easily do while being somewhat dismissive of supernatural claims. These claims are a dime a dozen and rarely compelling enough to warrant anything more than your most passing consideration, if that. So you can seek with all the sincerity in the world while paying very little attention to any of them. And whether Mike likes it or not, that includes his God claim. But he seems to be using the phrase in a totally different way, which is as a demand that people persistently zero in on his specific concept of God and pursue it until they believe it. This is an incredibly weird expectation.
Oh, dang it, I didn't read that. Not just unfocus. Yeah, I'm not following you there.
Pursue it until they believe it. This is an incredibly weird expectation. After all, Mike doesn't run around urgently asking Muslims to pray so he can find Allah or asking ufologists for tips on how to spot alien spacecraft, right? So why does he expect this kind of bizarre behavior from people who don't believe in his God?
Because it's not merely a matter of disbelieving in Allah or aliens. I believe in God, in Jesus. The truth of the Bible already discredits Allah and aliens, so I don't need to ask them. Atheism, on the other hand, and actually this makes me wonder which definition of atheism Prophet of Zod subscribes to. Is he a lacktheist? Or does he actually define atheism properly? When you ask a Christian for their evidence for God, they can give you the Kalam and the Bible, and any other arguments in between. When you ask an atheist for his evidence of his religion, what's he got? Probably divine hiddenness. In fact, it would probably primarily be divine hiddenness. I'm actually going to say this now before I forget it. But divine hiddenness is a gift for the people who would not accept God. Let's use Prophet of Zod as an example, assuming he will never reject God, assuming he's one of those atheists who, like Matt Dillahunty, which I guess I could have just used Matt Dillahunty, who said that if they were in God's presence, they would refuse him as their God. Wouldn't matter that they 100% believed he existed, they would reject him. Well, the Bible says that those with greater knowledge have greater condemnation. So it would be a mercy to just not reveal himself to those people. If they're not going to accept him anyway, they might as well not have reason to know he even exists, so they have less condemnation. And I've completely forgotten what Prophet of Zod was talking about, so let's go on.
It sounds like a bit of a double standard from someone who thinks his favorite supernatural claims are just way more special than the rest. But guess what? They all think that. Now, if you think that was bad, just watch.
As they should, if they believe it. You're not making a mic drop moment there.
Because next he gets into some weird gaslighting type behavior that honestly sounds kind of abusive.
Oh, he is trying to accuse them of gaslighting. Maybe it wasn't an afterthought.
So my thought is the hard part is that people then make it personal. Mike's not talking about this logical argument about God and his existence or whatever. Mike's talking about me. He's attacking me personally. He's by making the argument depend upon if I'm the atheist, depend upon my sincerity and my integrity. I then come into currently in our culture, a very advantageous position for arguing where I get to say, anyone who disagrees with me on this hiddenness thing is attacking me personally. They're attacking my sincerity. They're attacking my integrity. They're attacking my story. They're attacking my life, my lived experience. And that alone is incredibly persuasive for people, especially in our current culture. And for that, I go, okay, well, let's just acknowledge what's going on here. You're turning the existence of God into either I agree with you that you have good reason to think God doesn't exist, or you see me as personally attacking you because you've based your argument upon your own integrity and your own sincerity and the thoroughness and purity of your own search for God.
This is just incredibly gross, right?
No,
Mike's trying to
no, that's not gross. That's accurate. Were you born in a cave? Do you not see what's going on in the world around you? People are very much like this.
reinvent the story of something bad he did, and whenever someone tries to pull this off, it helps to hold them accountable by recreating the series of events. In this case, first, Christians propose the existence of an all-powerful God who wants us to know he exists. Second, atheists point out they haven't received any communication from this God, which implies such a God does not exist. And third, Mike suggests we only claim not to hear from God because we're in some way insincere. When you lay it out there, it looks pretty straightforward, right? But what does Mike take away from this? Well, he doesn't own the fact that he called us insincere.
Hang on, that is more this gaslighting. That was one possibility Mike threw out. It was not his whole argument.
He doesn't apologize for it, acknowledge that it was just him assuming what was going on in our heads, or in any other way recognize that it was an unconstructive way to participate in a conversation. No, he blamed.
Nor should he, because... just hang on, I need to check something. Mindshift's Take on Ringer's video, Mike's original video. Okay, good. So anybody can just go here and actually watch the actual video to get Mike's uninterrupted response to that question. But his whole argument wasn't, you're just being insincere. That was one possibility. Human psychology is complicated. There's going to be multiple answers.
No, he blames us, because apparently by telling him we haven't heard the voice of his God, we backed him into a corner where he had no choice but to call us insincere if he didn't want to believe us. Not only is this straight up abusive,
Prophet of Zod is just straight up lying right now. Mike Ringer said nothing of the sort, nor did he really even imply that.
Slapping someone across the face and
He was not backed into a corner.
then blaming them for it, but it gives non-believers literally no room to maneuver in the conversation. Everything we say, including everything we share about our personal experience, needs to directly validate his concept of God. If it doesn't, it has no place in the conversation, to the point that Mike can just call you insincere and then blame you for bringing it up. Basically, I think he just expects everyone to show up agreeing with him. This idea of conversation is...
In some sense he does, because he's talking to Christians, but I feel like I'm going to be saying this a lot, but Mike said more than just atheists are being insincere.
Is so insanely inflexible, I kind of doubt Mike knows how to have one. Maybe that's why he refers to everything he presents as a teaching. He's there to teach and everybody else is there to learn. I don't know. One thing...
Yeah, you don't know. That's the most accurate thing you've said so far.
I'll throw in here, just because I haven't gotten around to it anywhere else, is how totally bizarre this accusation is. Like if someone wants you to do something and you don't want to, you remain fully aware of their existence and still, just don't do what they say. It's how we choose not to comply with anybody who obviously exists. So if God obviously existed, wouldn't we do the same thing with him too? Mike's suggestion that we'd instead convince ourselves he doesn't exist is so far-fetched it starts to look like a transparent attempt to explain away God's unfortunate habit of not manifesting.
And the bottom line, though, is I don't think, Mike, that this should stumble you in your walk with God. Have you sought the Lord and found him? Why would you stop believing him because someone else says that they seek the Lord and don't find him?
I'll probably just cut out that whole last bit. I would need a transcript of it to actually respond to it properly.
There are 5 tactics in gaslighting. Any one of these on their own is simply a lie. It's the combination, the elaborate and deliberate implementation that makes it gaslighting.
Okay, seriously. Mike's just getting obnoxious in his effort not to understand where atheists are coming from. Like, has any atheist ever gone through the motions of praying and going to church just so they could come back to Christians and say, "See, I tried it and it didn't work"?
Reject. Deny or reject the accuser's version of events.
Someone who thinks his favorite supernatural claims are just way more special than the rest. But guess what? They all think that. In fact, they're actually less compelling, because the ghost claim is about a direct sensory experience, whereas the God claim is about an abstract, easily misunderstood experience that happened inside someone's head.
Diminish, marginalize, or reduce the accuser's claim. You're admitting that it happened, but not to the degree that they think it did.
Or that he doesn't exist. That seems more like what atheists would infer from the hiddenness of God.
Alternative. Offer an alternative example that's much bigger or much worse than what they're claiming, thus further diminishing their claim.
I agree with Mike that there can be a lot of things going on in the heart of a human. For example, when a religious fundamentalist hears a non-believer share their experience, something in their heart might be so invested in maintaining their personal concept of God that they construe what the person says as an afterthought to their atheism so they can dismiss it.
Assure. Reassure the accuser that your version of events is the correct one by using a statement they should already accept.
The problem is that he's starting out with a conclusion about God that he must defend at all costs. And this conclusion depends on a massive generalization about every person on Earth.
Blame. Accuse the accuser of bias or being the cause of the event.